Quick explanation. The reason why you're not going to see me actually hammering and doing that sort of work here is because my phone mounting situation that I'm running here is mounted to the desk, and it would be seizure inducing to every hammer blow. It would be it's terrible. You don't want to be there. Maybe in the future that will be solved, but for now, this is what I am working with. These are sometimes called pricking irons. If you're looking for them on Amazon or wherever, trying to find some cheap ones like these, you don't need to get anything expensive. Go ahead and search that name. Technically, these are not pricking irons. Pricking irons are just meant to leave a little mark. These are stitching chisels, or there are a couple other names they also go by. Uh, Definitely worth the investment, in my opinion. I think these are like $10 a pop when I picked mine up. I think it's like 14 or 15 a pop now. I have 4 millimeter, 3 millimeter, 6 millimeter. You can get them in imperial measurements as well, but as just with the little stuff that I do, I don't mind millimeters. I find it to be personally nothing against imperial, but I find millimeters to be very useful for a lot of things. For this project, I mostly used 4 millimeter, except for these areas where, if you can see those gaps right there, I used a leather punch, which I lengthened the handles on. But do not recommend doing this if you're doing lacing. Very much not recommended. Go with something like a 6 millimeter stitching chisel, lacing chisel, and punch that on in. So what I did was I punched those round holes, realized the holes were about twice the distance that I actually would need, and then went ahead and stabbed in between each of those holes with this single prong 6 millimeter chisel to open up a hole for the lacing to run through. Turned out all right in the end, but don't make my mistake. If you don't have these, you're gonna have a hard time running the lacing because if let's just say you have a nice cheap round awl, the problem that you run into just using an awl with a round profile is it opens up a small round hole, and that hole will tend to close back up because you're just spreading apart the fibers in the leather. It's going to want to kind of self heal to some degree. With stitching chisels, they have a diamond profile, and they open up a slot, rather than coming to a fine tip and just spreading the fibers apart. So that slot shape really lends itself to the lacing being able to travel through the hole that you've created, whereas this is round and the lacing you have is flat, so you're fitting the thin rectangular block into the round hole. There's a lot of friction. It's more trouble. Um, Obviously, easiest of all is to use the leather punch to open up a large round hole that will offer no resistance. But then again, the problem is it looks messy. You have gaps in the end, so go with something that cuts a nice little slot. If you look at these, so this is a 4 millimeter stitching chisel. 4 millimeter is the distance from tine tip to tine tip, with the space in between obviously going to be leather. Um, Anything between 4 millimeter and 6 millimeter should do just fine for a pouch like this, because that seam is reinforced with all of this decorative lacing, which is mostly decorative but certainly does serve some purpose in reinforcing that edge. When you're doing this, you're giving yourself about a 1/4 inch of seam allowance, we'll say. So let's just sketch this on real quick. We'll just say that this is roughly a quarter. Don't quote me on it, because I suck at eyeballing this stuff. Alright, so we'll call that a 1/4 inch. You're either going to want to go ahead and start on your line, or sometimes I just like to use the line as a guide, and I'll shoot a little to the outside just to give myself a little extra material instead of robbing myself of a little bit, because this is just going to be, again, hanging to the inside of the pouch. A quick tip that I'd like to give with regard to using these, your concern maybe, and I know my concern always is when using these. Let's say I start punching my holes in right here. So I've got a little bit of a distance down to the bottom where this tine is, this one here, very last one, is in line with my row that I'm going to create right here. And I'll just continue walking this on up as I hammer, hammer, hammer with my mallet. Once I start getting close to this end or start approaching the middle, what I like to do is start from this end and work from your ends toward the middle. And then somewhere here in the middle, either things will line up perfectly or you'll just fudge it a little bit and it'll all be fine. One thing I encountered with this elephant leather, it was just, I mean, it's very flexible stuff. It's chrome tanned. It's going to be stretchy just due to the nature of that tanning process. But I wanted to thin it down just a touch because I wanted this to be extra supple. Problem with elephant leather, highly, highly textured. And with it being thinned down as far as it is, you can't get it much thinner. I actually purchased one of these a little while back. It's very helpful when you're doing custom bits, random things. So like these retention loops are the same material as the lacing. So that all came from, well, here's a bit of extra actually. This is a little bit thinner than I wanted, so I'm keeping the scrap for something else whenever the need pops up. So oh boy, this lever raises or lowers this roller. You will insert leather into here. This springs up, so you want to feed the leather under your little spring. Typically, you're not going to want to have the grain side up, but this is just a little bit of scrap again. And you will apply pressure with this. You can tighten this side down, and this will hold that roller in that position, so you can focus on drawing your leather through, so it skives down to whatever thickness you have it set to. Thing I found out was can't thin this much more. I successfully thinned it down just a tiny bit, but I did waste a little bit in going too thin, where you will have basically this thickness of leather here in these thicker pockets, but you will cut all the way through in these deep creases, which makes sense that it would happen, but you live and you learn. I don't exactly remember the name of this kind of knife. I think it's often called a half moon knife, head knife, round knife. Not necessary for this project. Really, you can get away with an X-Acto knife, little craft knife, blades and things. Since it's mostly just going to be cutting out, either a circle. You can get away with using scissors, just straight lines. So they're your X-Acto knives and craft knives, or skiving down edges of thin bits of lacing. Also, again, they're X-Acto knives, little craft knives will work perfectly fine. But if getting even deeper into leather working, if you need to thin down areas of a piece of leather and only small areas, so let's say this edge, for example, this would be a great knife because you can come in here with a lot of control and skive down just an edge, whereas with a leather splitter you wouldn't have so much control over the gradient that you're creating in thinning that edge down. The other real benefits with the head knife for other leatherworking projects, again, not exactly relevant here, is you have so much blade surface area. Ooh, look at that. Whereas with a smaller knife, okay, you're using like mostly the tip or something, well, you're dragging that through all sorts of material. It's going to go dull really quick. Look at all the surface here. You can hold this a variety of different ways and make your cuts, depending on what's comfy for you, what you need to do. And you can spread that wear out across all of this surface. So you don't need to, honestly, this thing has stayed sharp very long. I'm not doing leather work every day. I do random things like this, but I've still been impressed with how long lasting this blade has been, as far as keeping that edge goes and staying shaving sharp. So yeah, there's that. You can make curved cuts with it. It's really comfy for doing that. It's straight cuts. It's a good all rounder. Again, I'm a fan of it. Highly recommend it. Another thing to note about this blade shape. So let's say you're doing a lot of cutting with a straight bladed knife. The edge is straight. What cuts nicer than a straight edge? A curved edge, which is naturally inclined to slicing action just by its very shape. So if you plant this down into whatever material, there's that natural slicing motion built into the shape of the blade itself. So it's probably more efficient than doing all the cutting with a straight knife, just by the shape of the blade. As for scissors, I use this. This was a gift given to me by an uncle some years ago. It's meant for processing game. Yeah, just gutting and processing, but these are, surprise, surprise, great for cutting through leather. Definitely a favorite. I could not find this. I think they stopped making them, which is really unfortunate because this knife stays heck sharp. I have yet to sharpen it, I think. It's crazy. I may have sharpened it once or twice, but that's again, I've been impressed with it. But yeah, the scissors will get you far, of course. For this project, I did make my own lacing, and I used my skiving tool here for that, as well as this handy tool. So definitely recommend one of these if you're making your own lacing. It comes with 2 different size spacers, different thicknesses, and each one can hold a razor blade, like you see here. This little guy sets your throat depth, I guess is what I would call it. So you can adjust depending on the thickness of your leather. That way it's holding it down, so your stuff doesn't hop up over the blade and get lost. You don't have all sorts of trouble that way. But yeah, definitely would recommend this if you're going to make your own lace like I did. In lieu of using one of those, alternatively, you could just get a good straight edge, a good metal straight edge, lay that down on your leather, draw some lines, take your knife and just carefully cut. And then, I mean, unless you have one of those tools, you're going to have a hard time skiving stuff down. So highly recommend just getting leather of the thickness that you'll be wanting to use to begin with. I really just value being able to modify things and piddle around like this. So I value these tools. These little brass needles for doing lacing work. There are either 3 or 4 sizes. I have 3 here. So the smallest, medium, and large. And they really are just brass rods with a threaded end. I find these hold on to lacing hecka good, and definitely recommend using these. I use these 2 sizes for my lacing for the project. These things are excellent. Yeah, I would highly recommend, if you can get them, these little gizmos. These things are handy. Little spring-loaded barrel here. If we can focus, there we go. So you pull this guy out, and that lets this loose. And when you use your pricking iron to create your holes in your sheets of leather, your different panels for your pouch, if you're feeling a little uneasy about just going ahead and getting started sewing everything together, and whether all these holes, let's say for the bottom of your panels, if you're concerned about those properly lining up nice and evenly with your actual bottom panel, so the bottom of this panel lining up with the holes in the bottom panel, your concern being, oh no, what if I have too many holes punched in this, or not enough, compared to the overall number of holes punched across the bottom of my 4 panels here. If you want to check that and you want to be able to adjust your spacing a little bit, that way, if they are a little bit off, you can, like I said before, leather is very forgiving. It stretches, it compresses. So if you are a little bit off in some way, you can kind of work those little, instead of just starting on one end and sewing all the way around and then, oh no, I found out I'm a 1/4 inch off, distribute that 1/4 inch that things are off across that whole seam, and suddenly it's not a problem anymore. So these are something that you could use in that situation to really help out with evenly distributing that excess or shortage, depending on which way your pattern falls, if your numbers are off a little bit. Hopefully that makes sense. I think I explained that well enough. But yeah, definitely recommend these for just mocking things up, temporarily pinning it together and checking for that. Let's talk about the actual lacing. You can buy lacing, or you can do what I did and make your own lacing. Yeah, this is some leftover bits of lacing that I didn't use. This one because it was a little on the thin side, this one because it's a little on the thick side. But just to illustrate what you're going to want to do. Let's actually just get one of these started in a needle just to illustrate that as well. So what I would do here is just kind of pinch and fold the end of this. Well, first of all, I would skive it down a little bit, which you can see I've done. We've got a nice taper to it. Give that a little fold and get that started. And then just start to rotate your brass needle to begin threading it on to the leather strip. You'll feel once it starts to really grab and hold, and you might want to, if the strip is thin enough, this one might be a little thick, you can kind of pinch this and help it to feed in. But you'll feel, and when it holds, oh, see, that one was a little light, probably good enough to work with, but a little on the light side. When it holds, it holds. Yeah, these things are the bomb. I love it. So anyway, let's say you have your lacing and you're looping through. Oh no, we only have a few inches left. What are we gonna do? We need more lacing. Here's what you do. You unthread this guy right here. You're going to clean up your edge. All right, so we got this twisted up mess from it being threaded onto the needle. We're going to want to take our knife and we're going to want to skive this guy down. Now we're going to want to flip it because we want to keep the grain side. So just trim off that messy bit, flip it, so now you're looking at the flesh side, and then at a very low angle, and make a nice long cut to thin that out. I could go thinner. There we go. So that's quite a taper we have here. It goes down to nothing, but it begins all the way back here. Longer is better, because what we're going to be doing is taking a little super glue, gluing these pieces together. So you're going to take your new lace. Let's just say this is, another 2 feet of lace. You're going to skive it down like that. Now we are really thin. And we need to keep grain side up, so we're going to be gluing like this because our needle is traveling this way, right? And if our needle is traveling this way, we don't want to overlap this side, because now every hole that we pass through as we thread our lacing through the holes on our pouch, we're going to be destroying our glue seam. We're going to be putting it under stress that it really doesn't need to go through. Whereas if you overlap it this way, and you feed through, it's under less stress. It tends to be anyway. This still might catch a little on the inside, but I find that this works out better. All right, let's talk needles. For the longest time, I got away with using these. They certainly were good for their time, but I have moved along to some more proper needles. They're a good cheap option though. You have your sharps and you have your blunts. So these are all sharps, these with a diamond cross section or triangular cross section. So Glover's needles, I think, is technically what they're called. These ones, they just have a largish eye, and these are round but sharp. So that's pretty good if you have already holes established in your piece with your stitching chisels or with an awl. If you're having a little trouble, let's say you're passing through multiple layers of leather, sometimes it can be a little tricky getting everything lined up just so. So a sharp needle can help with that. Like I said, these are a triangular cross section. They got a smaller eye, but they do their job. So that's for just piercing right into leather. I have them just to have them, to be honest. I don't really use them that often for anything. And then we have these. These are my blunt needles. So 18 gauge, 17 gauge, that's your needle size. 17 is bigger than 18. It's just probably going off of American wire gauge standards. Here is our 17 gauge. Here's our 18 gauge. You can get an idea of the. It's a slight size difference, but it's definitely there. And again, these are blunted needles. They're not. You got a little bit of a tip to them, but it's, you know, compared to the others, they're blunt. Make sure I get these right in the correct packaging. These are what you will typically want to use for your stitching. Now, we're here, let's talk about stitching. For something like this, the seams are all going to be hidden. If you're doing something where stitching is going to be exposed, round thread is great stuff. But pretty much everything else, artificial sinew. Great stuff. Use it for everything. Not too expensive and strong. Once I have finished my stitching, I have taken my pieces of artificial sinew, tied it into a little knot, snugged it, snipped. If I don't want to just put an open flame by my leather, because reasons, a good alternative, this thing will eat AA batteries. So if you use this, you will want to likely invest in rechargeable AA's. But if you want control, this thing is great. The construction is really, really chintzy. This is the contact. I actually bent these out so that way they'd have better contact, because that was one thing that was going wrong with this. Because like I said, the construction of this itself is not so great. Now I'm struggling to put it back together. This switch is also really cheesy. Like, this is it. There's just this little... I'm surprised that's even springing back. It feels so cheesy. And sometimes you will sit here and you will have your finger on the button, hoping and praying for things to warm up and for it to work, and it just doesn't work. So you check contact here, see that we're getting a little smoke off of it, it's working. It's a fresh AA in it, so that certainly helps. Like I said, it burns through them. You'll be a little surprised with how fast it drains them, but if you want control for finishing those things up, this is a great tool. Sometimes you gotta apply pressure, like I said, right here. Make sure you have good contact. Push down on this, make sure you've got good contact. If it's still not working, check your battery. Really, you're intended to change the battery from here, but it's nice to take things apart and see the insides. Homemade Montana pitch blend. Wax, actual turpentine. So we're talking actual distillate from pine tree resin, not secondary sort of byproduct of wood pulp processing stuff. You don't want the hardware store stuff. You want actual turpentine. Go look for the good stuff. You'll pay a pretty penny for it, but man, that stuff is a solvent. Pine resin and some neat oil mixed in. So ratio being 1:1:1:1, all equal parts, and you get this great smelling, dark, waxy, well, it is a dark paste wax. This stuff, oh, it smells so good. I need to make more. But I love finishing leather with that stuff. It gives it a little bit of color, a great smell, and it conditions it. There's no downside. Other conditioner. This is just paste wax. It is 1 part turpentine, 1 part beeswax. It kind of has like a petroleum jelly almost. It's a little thicker than petroleum jelly, that's for sure. But it's got a similar consistency that just rubs right into your leather. If you want, you can hit it with a blow dryer or a heat gun to try to get it to soak in a little bit. And sometimes it does help. You apply it, you warm it a little bit, and that's it. Good conditioner. Or you can just use whatever your preferred conditioner that you encounter. So, for example, one that I know is Snow Seal. That's on the waxy side. It's a good waterproofing material, and it's a conditioner. Bear grease, it's not actual bear grease. It's actually a petroleum product, I'm pretty sure. But that is a fairly common leather conditioner, that I've seen around. Just start taking a look, see what the ingredients are, see what you like, and what works for you. So hopefully this has given you all the information you need to know to develop your own pattern similar to the Goliath pouch, or copy the pattern that I came up with, or the confidence to go out and make another pattern like I've done here. This is the fourth pouch that I need to make, and the iterations that I went through: too big, too small, just right. I know this hasn't been the most attractive presentation. There hasn't been like a lot of crafting footage with talking over it and fancy music or anything like that, but hopefully I did meet my goal in equipping you with all the information you need and the mindset you need to go out and tackle creating a pattern and making the Goliath pouch yourself.